I'm focusing on the mind and beliefs and interpretations. And the reason I want to include this in our module on meditation, and the reason why I'm including it early on, is because we've probably all noticed that when we do sit in meditation, the number one thing that we struggle with is our mind. The number one thing that we struggle with in meditation is our mind. So we often sit in meditation with the intention of quieting the mind. And it's not uncommon to find that actually the mind gets activated during meditation. And one of the reasons there's so much focus on the mind in various meditation practices, it's because it was recognized by all the great masters that the mind and our addiction to listening to the mind's interpretations, as well as believing them, is the number one source of suffering. It's the reason we suffer. So there's always two things going on each moment. There's just what's happening, right? And then there's the interpretation of it, right? So there's what's happening in my life, and then the mind gets a hold of it and it interprets it. And that interpretation, of course, is coming from conditioning. You know, we've all been conditioned over the course of our lifetime to believe certain things. We've also developed certain beliefs to protect our vulnerabilities, to protect our difficult emotional states that we don't want to touch into. And so the first recognition is that there's two things going on. There's what's actually happening, and then there's our interpretation of it. And when we just live with what's actually happening, there's no suffering. There can be pain at times, but suffering is when we believe that the painful situation shouldn't be here. That becomes suffering. But pain is just pain until we attach a story to it. So it's really important to get to know the mind, to get to know it enough that we can let it settle into its right place, because of course we need a mind to live our human lives. It's important to get to know the mind because they perpetuate a lot of our very difficult emotional states. It also prevents us from developing the intimacy in relationships that we so long for. The mind keeps us in our addictive patterns, and on and on and on. So I want to talk a little bit about why meditation is such a good practice for getting to know our mind and eventually putting the mind in its right place. As I said, because when we do sit quietly, we become that much more aware of the antics of the mind, of the way that it's just got a running commentary going constantly. And not only is there this running commentary, it's, as the Buddhists say, it's a monkey mind. It's all over the place. It's not even consistent with its interpretations. So for example, your mind says, oh, it would be a really good idea to sit down in meditation right now. I think I'll do a 25-minute meditation, right? So you sit down, and 3 minutes in, your mind is like, whose idea was this? I think I should be doing something else right now. This is boring. I'm not doing this right. And so the same mind is coming up with a completely different story. Likely the second story has been triggered by the fact that some things that aren't that comfortable are arising, or maybe that because the mind is really busy, something in us interprets that as I'm doing something wrong, I'll never get this right. and therefore, why bother, right? So there's all kinds of things that can be going on to kind of get the mind to do a 180 degree in so little time. But if you watch your mind closely enough, you'll see it happens all the time. You know, you see a piece of chocolate cake over there and you think, oh, I've been really good. I've eaten, you know, really cleanly all week. And yeah, I'm going to have a piece of this cake. And 2 bites in, your mind starts saying, why are you doing this? You know, this isn't going to make you feel good. And now you're beginning to kind of tell yourself how undisciplined you are and etc. So again, this complete 180 that is very typical for the mind. So when we sit in meditation, we can use it as an opportunity to begin to get to know our mind. So often, people immediately make the mind an enemy in meditation because they believe that the mind needs to be quiet in order for meditation to happen. Actually, the more you try to quiet the mind, the more it's going to buck. It's like putting a horse in a very small stall where it can't kind of get its energy out. It's just going to buck and it won't stop. So one of the ways that we can allow the mind to settle is, one, to give it a very wide berth, which is to let it do what it needs to do. It's like putting that horse in a big corral. And yes, it probably will run around for a while and kick its heels up and all of that. But then eventually it'll just settle and be still. Right? So that's often the case when we sit down in meditation, that there's this kind of like a purging that happens, like a discharge that happens. And it just, any story that wasn't finished or that's related to some of the feelings in our body will just start kind of unwinding themselves. And so the key thing to recognize there is that we have a choice to entertain that, or just to see that, yeah, the mind is active right now. And I have a choice whether I'm going to entertain that, whether I'm going to follow those thoughts, or whether I'm going to stay here and allow the thoughts to just move through on their own, because that's what they will do eventually. And like that horse, the more we let it run, the more likely that it will settle down. So when we sit in meditation, we are put in touch with much more detail of our inner experience. You know, as soon as we close our eyes, we become aware of tension here in the shoulder, or that the breath is short, or that there's some anxiety here. And so our awareness of our inner world actually gets magnified when we close our eyes. And then the tendency is to start telling stories about these things. So if I sit down and my hip is achy right from the beginning, I might go into a story of, oh, I wish this wasn't happening. Now my meditation isn't going to be very good because I can't get comfortable. Oh, I should really go and see this doctor, or I should really, you know, and so now you're telling stories about the hip, which is fine, but again, to not get hooked into it. So you can let the mind tell its stories, but all we really know is that there's an ache in the hip. That's all we really know. And then what happens is we add on to that with the stories. And so in meditation, there's this ongoing question that we're living, you know, what is actually true in this moment? What is actually true right now? And so if anxiety gets stirred up because it needs some space, or it's being given some space to discharge in meditation, sometimes we'll begin to tell stories about that anxiety. Why we're anxious, who might be responsible for it, what we might do about it. And there again, all I really know is that I've got this kind of swirling sensation in my solar plexus in my heart. And even the label anxiety is kind of an add-on. I mean, we use labels as human beings for emotions because it just helps us to express ourselves. But the truth is minus the label, anxiety is kind of an energy just moving through our system. And so that's all we really know. Everything else is an add-on, is an interpretation. Sometimes when we sit in meditation too, as I was mentioning earlier, a lot of mental kind of proliferation can begin to happen. And sometimes even the mind gets very creative, and it can be really tempting to follow that. Or the mind gets busy making lists of what you can do to have a very productive day. And it feels like, well, why not, right? Why not? Because being productive is good, right? Yes, it can be, but it's not the reason why we're sitting here right now. If you find that you have a particularly active and creative mind at the beginning of meditation, what you might want to do is put a little sheet of paper beside you or a notepad so that you can write down the things that you're afraid of forgetting, and then put it aside and drop into meditation. So, while the stories are fine, I think what is important to remember is that that's not the purpose of meditation. The purpose of meditation is to drop beneath the stories, to see, to experience ourselves when we are beyond the stories, to experience ourselves beyond our current circumstances, beyond our feelings, beyond the current state of our body. One metaphor that might be helpful for you is, imagine you live by the ocean, and you live sort of on the outskirts of town, and in order to get to the ocean you have to travel through town, and particularly and specifically you have to travel through this market square. And the market square is full of beautiful foods and things you can purchase, and maybe even performers, and just very bright and enticing things. So in the morning, you decide that you're going to sit by the ocean, that you need some time to just sit in nature quietly and watch the waves come in and out. But in order to get there, you got to go through this market. And it's so tempting to go and, get distracted by all of these various things. But you remind yourself that that's not what I set out to do this morning. This morning when I woke up, it felt really important for me to spend time. That was the deep message that I received from my being. And maybe when I come back from the ocean, I can spend some time in the market. So there will always be enticing things. And of course, the market is going to be far more, and the beliefs and all of those, the thoughts and whatnot, the stories are going to be much more enticing to the ego. And so it will tend to kind of hijack our best intentions. So there's a few ways that I want to speak about this evening to decrease the dominance of the mind, to break our habit of following the mind, or of really being hooked into the mind most of our days. And all three of these are meditative type practices. The first one being, we can simply put our attention on something other than the mind. We can get the mind accustomed to not being the center of attention. So putting our attention on the breath, for example, is probably the most common practice for that. And the reason why in most Buddhist meditation practices, that's, what we do when we're first learning the art of meditation. So our attention is up here, we're following the stories, and the directive in meditation is to bring attention to the breath and to get to the breath as low as possible in the body. So the further we can physically get away from the mind, the more likely that we'll be able to stay there, and the more easy it is to disconnect from the mind. And of course, even when we say we're going to follow the breath, a breath and a half in, we might be back in the mind. Because one, it's a very ingrained habit. We're used to getting the mental commentary on life. But two, because the mind is used to having so much of the attention all the time, when we put our attention elsewhere, it's like a spoiled child that just wants to do anything to get our attention back. And that might include kicking and screaming and really kind of presenting some very outrageous stories so that, anything that's going to hook us in. Some people like to put their attention on a mantra. And, these mala beads that everybody likes to wear were actually originally designed to do mantra practice. So mantra is a word that we repeat over and over again. And in the malas, there are 108 beads, and we go around the mala saying our mantra and moving forward on the beads. It's very similar to the rosary, actually. And so kind of the physical touch on the beads helps to remind us of what we're doing and helps us to sort of keep track and more focused on what it is that we're doing. So your mantra doesn't necessarily have to be a Sanskrit word. It could be any word. It could be a short passage from a sacred text. It could be a phrase that you read somewhere that just kind of resonated with you and that you feel like you want to live with. So that could be a practice to reduce the dominance of the mind. Sometimes people will focus on a flame or a mandala, which is kind of this kind of a colorful image, usually very proportional, that you just look at it. And different mandalas are supposed to evoke different things in us. So those are some of the things that we can focus on. And actually, I would say that any kind of holistic movement form is a form of meditation that is encouraging us to bring attention to the body as it moves, to take the attention away from the mind. So in a yoga class, I think the most helpful ones are when the instructor is really encouraging us to feel where our body is in space and to allow for the sensations that are moving through in each shape of the postures. And when we're doing Qigong or Tai Chi or Feldenkrais or Alexander technique, which are all very body-based, there's a real kind of shifting from the thinking mind to, what am I sensing here in this movement? And so for those of us who have a hard time sitting still, movement meditation can be a very helpful tool and a helpful way to transition us, if that's what we desire, towards a sitting practice. Now, the drawback of this type of approach to reducing the dominance of the mind is that as soon as we are no longer saying our mantra or no longer focused on the breath or whatever it is that is the center of our focus, oftentimes the material arising from our body, the energies, the emotions, the sensations, the circumstances, the mind's input, we haven't really affected our capacity to be with the various details of our human life. We haven't really changed our relationship with our emotional being, with our mental being, with our physical being. And so the second practice that I want to speak about is to start by, to begin to acknowledge basically those other parts of our being. So as human beings with a physical body and a mental body and an emotional body and an energy body, we have been given many faculties through these bodies to experience our lives through, right? And yet most of us are primarily using our mind. We're experiencing our life through our mind, through its interpretations. And while that can be fine and it might have something to add, the point is that there's so much to be learned from the information that comes forth from our physical body, from our energy body, from our emotional body. And so what I'm saying here is that why not include more information as we live our moments? Why not listen to more of our faculties? Why not include information from more places in order to really sense the wholeness of each moment and not just the limited interpretation of the mind? It's acknowledging that the physical body, the emotional body, the energy body have a lot to tell us, have a lot to illuminate, have a big piece to contribute to our time here as human beings. So just, as a brief example, how many of us have had an experience where our mind and our body or our heart are in conflict? So we have to make a decision, and the mind is saying one thing, and the heart and the body are saying something else. And how often is it that we go with the mind and we realize afterwards that we should have listened to our intuition? Right? And so that is a direct experience of how valuable, and also, as we're going to see, how truthful the information that flows forth from our body, our physical body, our emotional body, and our energetic body is. And this is why in the meditation system that I teach, that at the beginning of each meditation, it's generally, okay, grounding, then breath, and then we begin to visit the different realms of our being. We visit the physical body and we acknowledge it. Oh, yes, I see my right shoulder is tight. Or, oh, I see that my hip is feeling looser. I feel hungry. I feel full. So you're getting to know the language of your physical body by including it in this quiet space of meditation. Why is that important? The more we can open to the language of the physical body, the more we can be open to what it is that it requires of us in order to be the best vehicle that it can be for our soul. I hold that our physical body contains all of the information. The user's manual is written right in our cells, right in our joints, in our whole body. And so the more that we can include the body in our meditation practice, the more that it's possible to take the spiritual realizations into our physical world and to enhance our health so that our experience here as human beings is sensual and beautiful and pleasant. Like it's a joy to have a physical body, and it's a joy to have a healthy physical body. And the body wants to help us to create that. That's why it's so important to make space to listen to it in meditation. And then usually from there we move on to the emotional body. So the emotional body too is a great source of information. It's also a great source of liberation in terms of kind of clearing the clouds that are sitting on top of our soul. And because we live so much in our mind and we haven't really understood the importance of tending to our emotional being, we have a lot of backup in our emotional body. And so when we sit in meditation, a lot of times the spaciousness that we are offering our beings, it takes it as an opportunity to begin to digest and discharge and integrate old emotions, maybe from yesterday, but it could also be from, when we were 2 years old. So that will necessarily happen in a soul-centered meditation practice. And so by bringing attention there, we become more acclimatized to the different feels of what it is for an energy, for an emotion to move through. And as we become more accustomed to it, there's less of a likelihood to try to suppress feelings. And of course, we'll talk about that more later, but it's so key to allow emotions to flow through. It's a huge part in our physical health. It's a huge part in the care of the body. It's a huge part in being able to relate to people in a way that is transparent. It's a huge part in feeling positive emotions as well, because we can't selectively suppress difficult emotions and expect that that's not going to affect our positive emotions. So if we want to feel more joy, we have to let our sadness be here. If we want to feel more tenderness, we have to let our anger be here. If we want to feel more self-worth, we have to let ourselves feel insecurity. So, so emotional, and then as we'll be talking about in the whole second module, we're going to be developing our capacity to move beyond the emotional realm into the more energetic realm. So beneath the emotional realm, there's even a more subtle level, which we often call the energy body. And as we're going to see, it's a key piece for accessing intuition, for accessing the soul, and also for working with people, whether that's through subtle soul coaching or formal soul coaching. Excuse me. Yeah, so that's the second, hold on here, turn this off. So that's the second practice that we will be exploring extensively in the soul coach training. So regularly visiting all of these different realms in our being to become more familiar with them so that we are less reactive, and we begin to use the information that they bring forth as pathways to the soul. So perhaps what I'll do now is I'll just take us through a meditation to give us an experience of what it is that I've just spoken about. So make yourselves comfortable. Closing your eyes. And just noticing that as soon as you close your eyes, your inner world becomes quite a bit more vivid, that almost immediately you become much more aware of the details of your inner world. So let's just start with bringing our awareness to the breath. So when I invite you to do that, where does your attention go? The breath happens all the way through the whole body, actually, but essentially the whole belly and up to the upper chest and the sinuses. So where does your attention get drawn to? And then once your attention is there, what do you feel? What do you notice? And can you notice what you're noticing without adding anything to it? And even if you are adding something to it, can you recognize your freedom to not entertain it? So here we're practicing allowing things to be as they are, and in other words, not adding any interpretation to them. So maybe we notice that the breath is a little bit short. So that's what we're noticing. Even though it's reasonable to have a preference for a breath that's smooth and long, we're setting our preferences aside in order to see what's arising in our breath cycle right now. And it's kind of a humble approach because we're recognizing that we may not know why the breath is short right now. There may be really good reason why the breath is kind of limiting itself. It may be feeling vulnerable, maybe needing to protect certain places, and that's usually why it shortens. And so until it feels safe, it won't want to move into that really full range. So we just meet the breath as it is. And then be open to the whole physical body. So we expand the lens of our awareness to include not just the sensations related to breath, but also any other sensations that come into our awareness. And again, just notice the tendency to want to tell stories about what we encounter, and just let those move through. And instead, just really inhabit the territory of the various sensations. Letting go of needing to know why things are the way they are, or how it is they're going to get fixed. And so we're just opening ourselves up progressively to more and more sensations. And it's a process of including. So it's not like we're really kind of moving from one sensation to the other and then pushing the other one out of our awareness. It's more of an opening, including this sensation, and then maybe another one comes into the foreground and the one before moves into the background, but it's still there. Right? So as we're bringing attention to the physical body here, yes, there's still an awareness of the breath moving through and the sensations related to that. And now we're including the joints, the digestive system, the head, the temperature of our skin, the feeling of our clothes brushing our skin, feeling of our body sitting in our chair, including, and letting ourselves not know why things are as they are right now. That would be the mind getting activated. And then we can open our attention to include the emotional realm. So even as I say those words and I feel that in myself, as a listener, you may just automatically open to these subtler sensations that we often give labels to and call a certain emotion. Or maybe it just feels like a tension in the body or a stress here or there. And so we notice that. We may simultaneously notice the tendency of the mind to begin to want to give reasons why this feeling is here. But the truth is when you go deep enough into any emotion, when you really just allow it to be as it is, you find that it rarely has anything to do with current circumstances in your life. And so let yourself not know why this emotion is showing up right now. And maybe even allow yourself to consider that it's showing up because it's got enough space to free itself, and that it's a positive thing, a liberating thing, a clarifying thing. And so we can become the witness of our moment exactly as it is. The more that we stay connected with the sensory world, with our inner body, the more interesting it becomes, the more it becomes very rich, very vibrant, very alive. And we fall in love, and we become very comfortable in these territories so that the mind can relax. You know, when we take up residence in our sensory being, physical, emotional, and energetic, it actually helps the mind to relax because it knows that we're home, that we're living from our full being, and that it doesn't have to do what it's been doing for most of our life. It actually appreciates the rest. So the activity of the mind that is so predominant for all of us has come from an overarching belief in the Western world that the mind and logic is the way to live our lives. Our minds are educated. We are told that we need to set goals and find solutions. And so, breaking free of this conditioned belief in the sovereignty of the mind is a practice. It's a willingness to consider these other sources of information. And the more that we consider these other sources of information, the more the mind comes into its natural balance, into its true function. So when we be with our moments as they are, without adding to them, there can be a restful sense in the body and a sense of feeling more relaxed, more spacious, more fluid inside, more harmonious. Great. So whenever you're ready, go ahead and open your eyes. Okay. I'm just looking at the clock here and seeing if I have enough time to cover this third way of, I guess I'll start and we'll see. So there's a third way of reducing the dominance of the mind and bringing our capacity to see what's actually happening online. And that is inquiry. Inquiry in the form of questioning our beliefs. So anytime that we are suffering as a result of something happening in our life, if we look closely, we'll see that the root of that suffering is a belief that we have about what should or shouldn't be happening, or what that person should or shouldn't be doing right now. So at the heart of any stressful situation is a stressful belief. And so learning how to identify the belief that's at the core of our reaction is a really important practice, because our conditioned mind and our ego is actually structured around all of the beliefs that we've taken on over the course of our lifetime. And so this process of identifying our most precious beliefs that actually create our deepest suffering can be a really helpful thing, because as we pull them out, they're like the kingpins that help the mind and the ego to begin to relax and soften down and reverse engineer themselves. So I want to speak about a particular technique that was developed by Byron Katie, who's the author of one of the books that I recommended that you purchase. And the technique is called the work. And basically, it's a series of very simple and systematic questions that you ask yourself when you're in a stressful situation to determine whether, well, first of all, what the belief is, but also whether or not it's true. It helps us to begin to let go of the untrue beliefs, not because somebody told us they weren't true, but because we have found out for ourselves through this process. So I want to use an example, a hypothetical example, in order to kind of be a little bit more concrete with using this practice. And then a part of your homework is going to be to do the worksheet, which is it's a step-by-step follow-along process that you can do to begin to experience the work yourself and to see what impact that has on your emotional body and your sense of peace and well-being. So the hypothetical example that I'll use is, I guess, the same one that I used last night. Is, let's say I have one of my children who, whenever I visit him, I'm noticing that he's not taking very good care of his health, and it's stressful for me. I don't like to see that, maybe because I put a lot of effort into doing everything I possibly could for his health as I raised him, and it's something that I happen to value very much. And so when I see him maybe not getting sleep or drinking a lot of coffee or alcohol or just not being very selective about what he's eating, I feel stressed. And so when I get home after a time when I was maybe activated, I can ask myself, what am I believing about the situation? So maybe it's that my son should be taking better care of himself, that he should be taking better care of himself. And maybe I have all kinds of reasons for that, but the key thing here is just to identify the belief that's at the core of the reaction that's causing me to be in conflict with what it is that I'm seeing. So the first question is it true? Is it true that my son should be taking better care of himself? And sometimes at first, the obvious answer is, of course, it's true. Everybody should be taking better care of themselves. They'd feel better about themselves. They would have greater clarity. They'd probably be more successful. They'll live longer. They'll have more energy. It seems like a beneficial belief to hold on to, right? But how do I know it's not beneficial? When I believe it, it makes me feel stressed. So if something that you're believing makes you feel tight and contracted inside, then I can assure you there's that belief is not true. If you hit on what is true, your whole system will relax and open. The heart will feel open. You'll feel just soft, happy. So if it's making you unhappy, if it's making you tight, then I can assure you there's a false belief in there. But there you go. So can you know that it's true? My first answer is yes, it is true. I've taught him so many things by the way I raised him. And why wouldn't he want to take better care of himself? So then the second question is, can you absolutely know that it's true? And there's something about that question that gets us to pause a little bit, kind of to back up and to see maybe a bigger perspective. So in other words, can I absolutely know that for where he's at in his life right now, for what stresses that are going on for him, for where he's putting his focus, for what lessons his soul is learning right now, can I absolutely know that it's true that he should be eating or treating his body any differently than he is right now. And I find that as I ask that question, it sort of naturally takes me back to times in my life where I wasn't taking as good care of myself. And there seemed to be really good reasons for that. Just the energy just wasn't there for it. So it's a humbling question as well. So my answer to that one, can I absolutely know that it's true right now that he should be taking better care of himself, is no, I can't absolutely know that. I can't absolutely know with what the skills that he has, with the capacities that he has right now, that he should be doing anything differently for his body. And it's kind of, I feel like a relief. There's a relief to see that, oh, maybe that rigid belief that's in direct contradiction to what's actually happening is false. And there's kind of this softening, opening. So then the third question is, how do you react when you believe that thought? So when I believe that he should be doing things differently than he is, that he should be eating better, should be taking better care of himself, I feel tight. I feel anxious. I feel concerned. I have thoughts of him getting sick. I'm not as present with him. I feel like when we spend time together, I feel tight. And so I'm not really enjoying myself. So you can look at all the different things that happen as a result of holding a false belief. So this is an important step to see that holding on to a belief has many, many consequences. And many of them are to ourselves, actually. And interestingly, in this case, the belief that he should be taking better care of himself or should be taking better care of his health is actually going counter to my own health. One of the things that I might notice is that when I'm concerned about his eating habits, my eating habits tend to start declining. When I'm anxious, I have a hard time making good choices for myself. So that's an interesting thing to notice, isn't it? And the fourth step is, who would you be without that belief or without that thought? So who would you be, meaning you go and spend time with your son now, and that thought has literally been erased from your mind, and he's just doing what he's doing, and you're who you are, and you're meeting him directly, not through your beliefs. And so the interaction is more loving. You feel more understanding, more present. Maybe you bring some nice food along and enjoy that together. And there's no trying to influence, there's just enjoying together. And you realize that, this may actually be the most direct way to help him to find his way to better habits. Another practice that comes through in this this process is where you take the belief and you turn it around. Meaning, in this case, he shouldn't be taking better care of himself. And I alluded to that a little bit earlier, basically because he's got a lot of other things on his plate right now. Another reason he shouldn't be taking better care of himself is that he learned about self-care through me, that I passed on to him or shared with him my passion for health, but maybe he hasn't really connected in a deep way to his own value around self-care. And so maybe he has to go kind of swing in the direction of less health as a result of his choices in order to deeply access the desire and the energy and the inspiration to care for himself through himself. Right? So I can see that. I can see that this may just be part of his process. The second turnaround would be he is taking care of himself. So sometimes we get very focused on a particular belief and we don't see that actually we're so kind of we have blinders on and we're not actually seeing that the opposite is equally true. So he is taking care of himself. Yes, I notice that he's drinking more water. I notice that he's playing hockey in the morning. I notice that the other night I was talking to him and he said, okay, I got to go now. I've got to get some sleep tonight. So when we kind of allow ourselves to take a belief and turn it around, we begin to see that there are many things that are happening that actually go entirely counter to that belief. And the third way that we can turn it around is I should be taking better care of my health. And invariably what I've found by doing this process is that anytime I'm holding a judgment on someone else and I sincerely take it back to here, I see that actually there's something here that wants to be seen. So oftentimes when I find myself being critical or judgmental of what other people are doing for their health, I notice that actually my own self-care has kind of not been as impeccable as it could be. I'm not sure if those are the right words, but you know, I realize that I too have kind of slid in a certain direction that's not as nurturing for my body and every other part of my being. And that's not a reason to beat myself up, but that's a way to kind of come inside and to see that, yeah, that's happening here too, and to develop compassion for myself and for him, to see that, yeah, I've been anxious about something and somehow that's been affecting the way that I take care of my body. And so then I can deal directly with the anxiety, which may be the exact same thing my son is dealing with. I don't know that, right? But oftentimes, you know, when we bring it home, we get in touch with the real source of the discomfort and the place where the true solutions lie, which is within ourselves. You know, we are, right, the change that we want to see in the world. And is it even possible that as I look at this deeply and I heal it within myself, that on some level will positively affect my son? And of course it will.